Well, hello, it's Richard Pears from FinextraTV, and it's a real pleasure today to be joined by Jessica Smith. She's the nature lead at UNEP Finance Initiative. We met some year and a half or so ago, coming off the back of COP15, and we meet again coming off the back of COP16, the Nature and Biodiversity COP. Hello.
Hi, Richard. Thank you so much for having me again.
Well, lovely to see you. And we were just chatting beforehand. I know you've taken a week's break, but it's only been a week since you got back. But I hear, a need to recover because the run-up to these COPs sounds like it's an absolute marathon. Tell us a little bit about that to give us some color on the work that goes into it.
Yes, absolutely. So we had an unprecedented surge of interest from the financial sector. So even though the COP was in Cali, which is, for many in finance, a little bit harder to reach than Montreal, there was actually more from the financial sector. We had the estimate of around 5,000 individuals between the green zone and the blue zone. So our team was really in a big push. We had no weekends, no evenings in the run up. We also had Climate Week, quite a lot of preparations. So we did launch a number of publications, and our team was involved in 114 events, including the Finance Day on the 28th, which was the kind of cherry on the cake of all the finance sector engagement. So we actually had 3 people on scheduling every time we had changes of schedule cascading around. So it was a heavy lift.
Wow.
And it really did involve quite a number of people. We had around 14 in our team on site in Cali, and then many in the background bringing this all together. So it was an incredible moment to have the financial sector really engaged on nature. And I think there were some successes and some reflections of what's needed next.
Well, it's good to reflect on that, isn't it? Because it's not just a one-off event either,
Yes.
despite all that effort. It's a milestone on a journey. And although some of the mood music, as you said, is, there's been wins and otherwise. But, you coming back, the texts and the targets we spoke about last time were so aspirational and positive, and this was the implementation COP. Tell us about what you think was achieved, what the positives were, what we should take from it, and lessons to be learned, and what's coming next in that journey.
Yes. So we left COP15 from Montreal on a high. It was really a decadal agreement, and there was a lot of goodwill and momentum. And we've seen that from all segments of the financial sector since. So we've seen banks, insurers, asset owners, asset managers, export credit agencies, venture capital, private equity, everybody's excited about nature. But COP16 was really where the rubber hits the road in terms of countries getting their updated national biodiversity strategy and action plans in place and having conversations about how these are going to be financed. So as I mentioned, we were extremely excited with the fact that the financial sector came out in force. They heard the call and they responded to it. But unfortunately, many countries either didn't update their national biodiversity strategy and action plans in time, or only updated targets. And many of them just gave them in the days leading up to the COP. So it didn't really lead to constructive conversations about how to finance. So I want to focus a little bit on what some of the positives of the COP were. But I also want to mention that there wasn't an agreement on resource mobilization. So how the target 200 billion per year would be secured. And honestly, if you're in the financial sector, 200 billion a year doesn't actually sound like that much. It's 0.0001% of financial flows that are moving around in the market. And we see a lot of momentum for private finance, but many countries don't necessarily feel that private finance is going to meet their needs, or they want to make sure that they have a suite of financing options that didn't come to the table with the negotiations.
I see. So yeah, so let's develop that a little bit further. What should we be focusing on? What's the opportunity, both that, if you will, is more concrete and near term, as well as the areas that people should be developing, and be that financial instruments or public activity?
Yes. So At New York Climate Week, we released a discussion paper with our friends at the Finance for Biodiversity Foundation. And this was as a result of consultations with 100 different organizations over the summer. And that paper looked at what the financial sector could do to help meet nature positive. So a segment of that is going to be phasing out or excluding finance to things that are harming nature that could be replaced with other activities. A big portion, I'm going to say 90%, should be having nature mainstreamed into existing economic activities. So into infrastructure, real estate, agriculture. And then a much smaller proportion are going to be investments into conservation, restoration, stewardship. Another piece are going to be the investments into changing the system, into changing our economic models so that we can have nature positive, regenerative businesses in the future that operate within planetary boundaries. So this really needs to be the spectrum that we're looking at when we're talking about resource mobilization. One of the exciting opportunities that came up at this COP, the Global Biodiversity Framework had mentioned Indigenous peoples and local communities 18 times. And there are a lot of studies that suggest that Indigenous peoples are really effective and efficient at stewarding biodiversity. So at the COP, there was a new body set up for Indigenous peoples that will guide the convention, just like we have a Western science body already, the SBSTA, that gives advice to the convention. And a lot of Indigenous peoples and Afro-descendant communities are calling for direct access to finance. And actually, I think that this is a fantastic opportunity to be really efficient in how we meet that funding for stewardship, conservation, and restoration, cut out the middleman as much as possible and invest directly in nature stewards who are on the front line. Another major area that came up during the COP is the idea of natural capital as infrastructure. So when we think about infrastructure finance, we recognize that there are public goods that we need out of infrastructure. And it is the same with natural capital. There are large public goods that we're trying to finance on a major scale to keep our economies stable, our societies, comfortable, and opportunities available for future generations. So the idea of thinking about nature finance in terms of financing public infrastructure is one that took hold quite a lot. But again, there wasn't an agreement made, and there wasn't an agreement made on the D3 indicator, which is the indicator that will track private finance. So we do think there's an opportunity now for private financial institutions to pilot reporting on this indicator so that they can show countries what's possible. And in that way, influence what are the ways that we are tracking the finance related to nature, including finance that helps to avoid harm by maybe having a comparable baseline that you're doing X versus Y, and you can show the benefits for nature, and you can get some recognition for that type of finance as well.
And I imagine, that narrative is a very important one to tell, to embrace everybody from local and, Indigenous people, local communities, all the way through to, public sector, the people that are, the economists, people worrying about just the cost of living crisis. Yes. And if you think about telling that narrative in the way that you have, infrastructure grows jobs, but in the past we've just thought about pouring concrete and steel, and this is resilience as well as growth, etc. Who's responsible? We hadn't spoken about this before, but who's responsible for building that narrative and sharing those, if you like, the economic data behind that, as well as the good health data, if you will, behind that?
Well, I would say it's a shared responsibility. So we do need governments who are willing to join PPPs. And I would say England, the EU, Australia have had some really innovative examples. And we also heard a lot from the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, with a lot of examples from their region as well. South Africa has been one of the pioneers in what they call ecological infrastructure. So making sure that the infrastructure is there to manage water resources, which are very scarce in that country. So on the one hand, we need governments, we need de-risking entities, and we need private finance who are willing to join these types of transactions and share their experience. So I would say the narrative won't go far if any of those partners are missing.
Okay, and I just think it's probably going to be that a very important thing, because sadly, as we know, many of these topics get divided by our world of social media, which we
Yes.
won't get into. But a good strong narrative is important. Um, okay, so let's sort of move on a little bit from that. Let's think about COP15, because there was more than just the finance and the indigenous rights involvement. There were more targets there. Let's step away from the finance. I know that's your speciality. What other would you say positives we can take since COP15?
It's a good question. So target 2 around 30 by 30 restoration and target 3 around 30 by 30 protected areas were ones that a lot of stakeholders were really interested in. And I would say the progress on those has been um, mixed, in the sense that there hasn't been a surge of investment in restoration as hoped for. However, under target 3, if we count Indigenous led areas into that figure under other conservation measures, we're actually very close to meeting that target number 3. But the problem is, a lot of the parks, protected and conserved areas that are under target 3 are, what are called paper parks. So they exist on paper, but they don't necessarily have management effectiveness to make sure that their outcomes are very strong. So under each of these targets, there's a little bit of nuance, but again, always coming back to finance, we did have a lot of banks who came and said, we do sovereign finance. That's one of the things that a bank does
Yeah,
well. So
absolutely.
if you as a government have a public policy objective, which is to set up more protected areas and manage them well, that is precisely the kind of thing that we can provide finance for. So, I'm optimistic that we're only 2 years into the agreement. We have until 2030 to meet the full spirit and targets of the agreement. Coming back just again to the finance related targets, 15 is the target, which is on disclosure, and we had, I think, close to 500 financial institutions, corporates, and others who are voluntary TNFD early adopters. And we also had the first example of a stock exchange who is going to require TNFD disclosures in order to list, and that was actually Botswana, a country that's very well aware of its natural capital.
Mm.
So I think that one is quite successful. Under Target 19, we've previously released data that shows that there's an 11x increase in private finance for nature over the past 4 years. So we actually think Target 19 is in reach. Our position is that we just need to keep doing what we're doing and keep that momentum up. But the larger challenge is goal D, which is overarching how aligned is finance. And it's with the climate equivalent of the Article 2.1c is how much of the finance that's flowing around the system is actually in line with the goal of halting and reversing nature loss. And in that one, I would say, we still see 140 times more harmful finance than positive finance. So a big concern would be, for example, getting deforestation out of portfolios. It seems like there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that somehow we still haven't managed to act on. And it really comes back to risk for financial institutions. So, we're getting to a point where, society won't accept that, they can't track these issues, or they don't understand their supply chains, or they can't get data. We've heard those excuses now for many years.
Yeah.
And so we need action on these low-hanging fruit where we're really undermining action, for example, in the net zero space by continuing to finance activities that are converting intact ecosystems, and our Amazon is close to a tipping point. So
Yeah.
We really need to prioritize that avoidance of harm from the financial sector as really the urgent priority.
If you just had sort of a very limited set of things you could target, to deliver that? Because I know when I was discussing this with Anita, it was everything everywhere.
Yes.
My dear old boss Bill Gates would have marched me out of the room if I'd said that. Although I'm being disingenuous. I totally accept what Anita's saying. But if you said, okay, I'm going to focus on, I don't know, wildlife crime, because it's an emotional subject. It's got all sorts of policy and political and societal issues, and I can track that through existing mechanisms such as anti-money laundering, etc. And there's a load of people analysing that through the data laws. I'm giving you an answer, but ignore that. What would if you see a sort of set of gated steps, if you like, that if you had only one choice, you'd kind of go, that might get us really moving.
Yes. Well, actually, I'm glad that you asked that. I didn't plant this question.
No,
We did
sorry about that.
We did a set of priority actions for banks. So what we've heard from a lot of financial institutions is, they're aware of nature risk, and they get stuck in kind of an analysis paralysis. They get stuck in the, we need more studies, we need more data, we need to do something here, we need to do something there. We said, okay, yes, keep that team going, make sure that you understand materiality of your portfolio, but you actually need to act today. And the place that you need to act for a bank is the front office deal making teams. The function of a financial institution is to make deals, to keep capital flowing into the economy. So we did a publication between the Principles for Responsible Banking and the Biodiversity Consultancy, which is priority actions for banks. And we basically said, here are no regrets actions that your bank should be doing today as priorities. And we focused on forestry, mining, and agriculture. And we narrowed in on key commodities. And we said, these are things that you can ask your clients to do today. So we can share that publication, but
we'll do that. We'll put a link in the post. Yeah.
Get out of analysis paralysis, focus on where the bank is banking with your clients, and get out there and act today.
Well, I knew you'd be able to handle any question I threw at you. So that was just want to keep you on your toes. But listen, fantastic. We will definitely put the link of that one in there. So let's think again. We've now got this audience here, which is people that want to get stuff done. The tech industry, the finance industry. I think that will be a very helpful response to this question. But last time we spoke, I asked, what can the fintech industry do? We spoke about data, etc. How would you respond this year? What is needed from these guys to help out?
Well, this is an extremely exciting time for two reasons. One is that we're starting to see the TNFD disclosures, so we're getting whole new batches of data. The second is we're going to have at least 50,000 companies reporting in the EU. And they all have nature-related risks to report on as well. So there is going to be absolutely a boom in new available data. And we're going to need to help financial institutions to interpret that data, to make it meaningful, to make sure that it matches to the decision-making process that they have, and they understand the relevance for their portfolio. I would say also the monitoring, reporting, and verification as we're getting into thinking about nature-related markets, so new bio-credit markets as one example. And we can really pull this together looking at the entire impact of a portfolio. So we're starting to think about how can you use Earth observation data, for example, to think about the entire impact of your portfolio, to aggregate data about where your operations are, where supply chains related to your financial institutions are. So I see an absolute mushrooming opportunity for fintech companies in this space. And given the fact that we need to make all of these transactions as efficient as possible. So any excuse to not consider nature, we can't abide by it anymore. We need products that allow us to see the portfolio, to make decisions in a really rapid, efficient way. And I see tech coming in and providing that intelligence that we need.
Brilliant. And we always get the thing, well, we just need better data, normalized, baseline, benchmarked, etc. And our response is the tech industry, can do that for you. You don't have to wait for some sort of global standardization.
Yes.
And don't, and good is what is it? Perfection is the enemy of the good and all that sort of stuff. We just need to get moving, don't we?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, look, and let's just give you the microphone to end with, if you will, on your one key thing that you think people should take away from both the COP and what you've said today, so that they can kind of go back and replay it and go, right, that's the thing I'm going to go and study and get going on. What would your one key focus area be for folks?
Yes. Well, I would say we've exceeded 6 planetary boundaries. We're exceeding a 7th. We may exceed the others as more data comes in. And we had mixed signals on transition risk at the COP. Honestly, we didn't have a strong message from countries as we'd hoped. But the physical limits that we're hitting in our planet are, simply inarguable. So every financial institution should be thinking about nature risk, how it affects their portfolio, how it's relevant to individual transactions, and how, if they want to be a financial institution in the future, how are they positioning themselves now for the economic sectors that are going to operate within planetary boundaries. So I would say this is not a CSR case. This is not a reputational case. I would say this is a core business need for all financial institutions to think about what the physical limits that we're hitting mean for their ability to do business in the future. And I'm going to mention the insurance industry, and obviously the recent hurricanes, particularly in South Florida, give a lot of pause to thinking, is anywhere going to be insurable in the future? And if we have insurable sectors, what do those look like? And I think banks and investors should be thinking along the same lines. What are the insurable, bankable, investable sectors that are going to be around in the future? And we cannot get around the physical limits. So we just had a very reflective conversation within my team that, even if the policy signals are not there now, there's actually a really big opportunity for creative thinkers, for future-oriented thinkers, because these physical limits are not changing. They exist, and how do we make the best of where we're headed as a planet, and how do we think about what are the opportunities in this space to both exist as a business and make things better? And to me, there's no way to unpack those two. So I do think we really have an exciting moment to think about new ways of doing business that we've never done before, and I do think tech has an incredibly important role in that.
And as you said, therefore, think of nature as resilient infrastructure, and apply all of the tools and techniques you've done to infrastructure, but this new asset class.
Exactly. This is an underpinning of all the activity that we definitely can't do without. So we do need to think about how do we make this underpinning of our economy resilient enough to keep us all going. And I think the idea of framing it as infrastructure helps us to understand what's the piece that each part of our ecosystem can take on, and move along that line together.
Wonderful. Well, Jessica, as ever, absolutely fascinating and heroic work that you and your team are doing. Keep it going. We thank you for that, and we hope to speak to you again very shortly. But for now, thank you, Jessica.
Thank you so much again for having me, Richard.